Hi, I'm Dr. Siciliano, and this is lecture number 2 of the Sociology of Work and Technology, Sociology 336 at Queen's University. Right, so the first 2 assigned readings from this course provide background on the Canadian economy and labor force. My hope in assigning these 2 readings is for you all to understand the current context of work in Canada, which is the backdrop against which this course takes place. So, I think the first question that the first chapter answers is how did Canada's economy emerge, and where does it seem to be headed? As I'm sure most of you are aware, Canada's history is rooted in the British colonization of North America, and more broadly, it's also rooted in the shift to a market economy and the rise of capitalism. Now, work used to be organized in what is called craft production. Right? This begins there. This is a situation in which a skilled artisan, for example, like a blacksmith, a shoemaker, or a baker, handled all aspects of producing their products, whether it be shoes, metal items, or bread. From start to finish, they determine how, when, and the particular process by which whatever it is that they were making was made. Work was also organized in what was called the putting out system. This is mentioned in the textbook, wherein family households were contracted by local merchants to kind of put out or produce particular items. This is often, patriarchal in terms of organization. So the head of the household, who was often the father, oversaw production and determined how to divide tasks. Some of you might have heard the phrase at some point, "Oppression begins in the home." And it's like a very famous kind of phrase from various critical social movements, and that has its roots in the history of work. So over time, these ways of organizing work kind of evolved or kind of grew into industrial production through a combination of kind of new technologies, innovative ideas, and new forms of energy in the form of coal and steam power in the 1700s kind of coalesced to result in the industrial mill, in which workers and machines operated together in a centralized place under the control of managers. And so you have people from kind of different cultural backgrounds, different religious affiliations, different families, potentially even different parts of or regions of countries kind of coming together to work in a factory. People might have different expectations. They might be, you got to imagine at this point in time, this was very kind of new to go into, to not work in the home or not work in a more artisanal kind of mode of production. And because of its novelty, but also because of, just the fact that workers coming into the situation might not know or might not want to do exactly what their boss expects of them, it creates problems that need to be solved that are perennial problems for capitalist organizations, which is how is it that labor is controlled. Now, the converse of that, of course, has always been that control or power provokes resistance, and so the issue for workers is how does one kind of resist managerial authority. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, with the rise of the factories, with the rise of industrial mills in like the 1700s, you saw a shift from the sort of primary sector of, say, agriculture or resource extraction like mining and things like that, a shift in the economy toward the secondary sector or manufacturing, right? And so you have factories, you have a heightened division of labor, which we'll read more about next week. And this new way of organizing work and the economy, what we call capitalism, resulted in what Karl Polanyi calls the great transformation of social life, in which social life comes to be kind of dominated by market forces and subject to market, the needs or demands of the market. And with it, you have continued problems, is what I was talking about, continued problems related to capitalists' need to control and manage workers. Capitalism's rise, as mentioned in the chapter that I had you read, chapter 1, was also intertwined with colonialism, which is something that's quite evident in Canada's history, as well as that of our neighbors, the United States and Mexico, as all of these countries emerge from European efforts to control other people's lands and resources. The legacy of that, which I just mentioned, colonialism, is something that we're still kind of wrestling with today. So up through the 1840s, rather, Canada's economy was still kind of focused primarily on, well, what I call the primary sector. So logging, mining, other forms of extraction. Most resources that were extracted were either used by Britain, so they were shipped to the UK, or were sold in global markets. So a lot of the wealth being produced by Canadian workers at the time wasn't really experienced here, and actually, like, there wasn't quite as much of a market economy in Canada up until after Confederation in the latter half of the 1800s. And then you saw the rise of industrial centers near Toronto and Montreal. Prior to that, most manufacturing, if it occurred at all, was shipbuilding, mostly in Nova Scotia and other maritime provinces. And you also saw the decline of craft work toward the latter half of the 19th century, going on into the early 20th century, with the decline of craft work, craft organization that I just described a few minutes ago. You saw a heightening of the division of labor, something we'll read about next week, and the dividing of tasks into component parts. Again, we'll read more about that next week when we talk about scientific management. Now, since the 1960s, there's been a huge shift to the tertiary sector, or what is more commonly called the service sector, sometimes the knowledge economy or the information economy. You'll see the rise of industries of, most of the industries that you might yourself want to go into, such as finance, research, culture, media production, education, information, tech sectors, design, but also hospitality, healthcare, people who primarily perform emotional labor. Alongside this, you see incredible changes in the workforce. We have an aging workforce, predominantly, made up of baby boomers and older Gen X. So baby boomers are those who were born, between 1946, right after World War II, and 1965, most of whom are refusing or cannot retire due to the demands of contemporary market economy. Just, FYI, by 2036, 25% of Canadians are going to be over 65, which is the sign of a, quite graying population or aging population. Now, you might say, okay, well, what does that mean? It's going to be a bunch of old people to contend with. What's that mean for me? And what it means for you is that it's been much more difficult for younger generations, such as yourself, but also people like myself, millennials, to get a foothold in good jobs. But it's been very difficult because most of those, the older the younger baby boomers who are still employed, but also the kind of older Gen X people are holding on to those jobs for longer. They're also living longer, which makes it much harder for people like yourselves, people like me, to achieve what have been the conventional markers of adulthood. A good job, one that pays enough to raise a family on or own a home. At the same time, there's been increased work participation overall, meaning more and more people have the opportunity to join the legitimate workforce. There's more and more people entering the workforce. but the kinds of jobs they have access to aren't all good jobs, and at the same time, you still have this persistent kind of inequality where men, most often white men, are the highest earners, and we'll learn a bit more about those issues as we go along through the course. So you have the decline in the availability of good jobs. You also have declining job stability, especially among women, visible minorities, indigenous peoples, and young people such as yourselves. At the same time, you have heightened education, which means that all those people that are in unstable, kind of precarious jobs are all highly educated, or tend to be highly educated, which results in stiffer competition when people with college or university degrees, or even master's degrees, are all competing for what ultimately amount to entry-level, often low-paying or precarious forms of work. It also means that for people who don't have a post-secondary education, they're at an incredible disadvantage, because what we also find is that education, at least statistically speaking, seems to offset that instability that people experience. Now, like I said, you have a highly diverse workforce, more diverse than ever before, with 22.3% of the Canadian population identifying as a visible minority. But at the same time, like I said, you have heightened unemployment among some of those same groups, right? Notably, new immigrants as well as indigenous peoples whose unemployment rates are nearly double the rate of the Canadian workforce overall. Now, against this backdrop, we're often told that we're more technological, or that technology and the tech sector are going to pave the way for a new future in creative jobs, or as entrepreneurs out on the platform doing work for an Amazon or an Uber or whatever. To this, I want to ask, for whom is this true? For whom is that possible? What techniques of organization and what technologies make this possible? And I want you to notice that in Chapter 3, there still remain stark divisions along lines of class and its intersection with race, ethnicity, citizenship, gender, and age. Against this backdrop of this sort of technological future, you still see that. You still see marginalized, non-white peoples, women, young people like yourselves. They still get the short end of the stick when it comes to work, right? They're often working more for less money and with less stability when compared to white men, so especially white baby boomer men. So, for example, yes, more women are participating in the workforce than ever before, but they do so most often in low-paying, low-status jobs. What the book calls pink-collar jobs due to the overwhelming number of women in low-level clerical, sales, and service positions. Likewise, occupations tend to be gendered, with more women performing jobs that require care work or emotional labor. So, for example, women tend to be overrepresented in healthcare and education occupation. And as we'll see next week and the week after, these divisions at the level of the labor process, the division of labor that you see, wherein there is a managerial class that defines who should do what and when and how they should do it, and then there is workers who carry out what managers tell them to do. That division along lines of class emerges from a specific technique of organizing work, just as divisions along lines of race, as we'll see in week 3, are fundamental to capitalism and are at its very roots almost inseparable from the capitalist organization of work. And then we'll also see in that same week 3, how gender also plays a role in controlling and dividing workers from each other. With that in mind, I'll see you on Wednesday. Take care.